For the first time in years, it felt like we could finally breathe. After years of surgeries, physical therapy, and late-night emergency runs to the hospital, our daughter Nora, our bright, brave, wheelchair-bound 10-year-old, was finally finding her rhythm in life. She had a rare, genetic condition that made everyday mobility a challenge, but that never dulled her spirit. Her laughter still rang through the halls like wind chimes, her sketches filled the fridge, and her curiosity about the world made every evening at the dinner table feel like a story time. My wife, Tara, and I had sacrificed so much to get her here. We drained our savings, moved halfway across the state, and downsized everything except our hopes. This new community, quiet, suburban, safe, seemed like the perfect place to rebuild and give Nora a fresh start. I had just landed a stable IT job downtown. Tara had finally started her dream vegetable garden, and Nora was even attending a nearby therapy center that specialized in her condition. Life, for once, felt normal, even joyful. Then Martha Kingsley introduced herself. She showed up on our doorstep with a tray of muffins and a clipboard, classic neighborhood charm, with a twist of formality that immediately put me on edge. She introduced herself as the president of the HOA, and the moment she smiled, I knew something about her didn't sit right. It wasn't just the way she looked at us, polite but calculating. It was the way she looked at Nora, like she was assessing her, measuring her worth against some invisible standard. Still, we were new, and we didn't want to make waves. We nodded, smiled back, and thanked her for the welcome. But after that day, her presence began to grow, like ivy, wrapping itself around every aspect of our lives. Notices about the wheelchair ramp violating community aesthetics. Complaints about Nora's specialized medical van clashing with neighborhood uniformity. Suggestions that perhaps the therapy dog Nora was waiting for wouldn't be ideal for the community. It all came under the guise of HOA policy, but the message was clear: we were not welcome. Despite the tension, we pressed forward. Nora had made a friend across the street. Emily, a kind-hearted girl who pushed Nora's chair through the park trails and shared her obsession with space documentaries. Seeing them together made everything worth it. It made the late nights, the debt, the moving, all of it feel like it had led us somewhere beautiful. But that illusion shattered one spring morning when Tara walked outside to grab the paper and found Nora's wheelchair tipped on its side in the front yard. It was like something out of a nightmare. No scream, no call, just the eerie silence of a child who should have been inside, safe and warm, and wasn't. The front door had been unlocked. The cameras on our porch mysteriously went dark for 20 minutes. And Nora, our entire world, was gone. In that moment, the air left my lungs. Tara dropped to her knees and screamed Nora's name until her voice cracked. I ran from room to room, shouting, praying, begging for a sign this wasn't real. But it was. In the blink of an eye, our perfect life had been ripped apart. And somewhere deep in my gut, even before the investigation began, I felt it. This wasn't random. This wasn't a stranger off the street. Someone had planned this. Someone who had been watching. And everything in me pointed to one name: Martha Kingsley. The police arrived within minutes, sirens slicing through the early morning calm. Officers taped off our yard, questioned neighbors, and requested access to the few private security cameras scattered around the street. Tara sat on the porch steps, rocking back and forth, whispering Nora's name like it was the only thing tethering her to this earth. I stood beside the police chief, heart pounding as they reviewed a blurry clip from our neighbor's camera. There it was, grainy but unmistakable, Nora being pushed down the sidewalk in her own chair. A tall woman, face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, rolled her into the back of a black SUV. There were no plates visible, no sound, just 24 seconds of footage that confirmed what we already knew. She was taken. But something caught my eye. A flash of metal as the SUV turned. A license plate just barely legible. HOA 1. My breath hitched. That was Martha Kingsley's vanity plate. She had mentioned it once with pride at a neighborhood barbecue, calling it the badge of order. My stomach flipped. I didn't want to believe it. Even after the harassment and her icy stares, I couldn't wrap my head around the possibility that she'd actually take Nora, but Every instinct inside me screamed that she had. I told the officers what I saw. They nodded, took notes, and told me they'd look into it. Hours passed. Then a detective returned, stone-faced, and said Martha had already been questioned. Her alibi? She had been presiding over an HOA board meeting that morning, complete with minutes, witness signatures, and even surveillance footage showing her at the community center during the exact time Nora vanished. Case closed, at least for them. But not for me. We knew she had resources, connections. She was the HOA, its president for 7 years, backed by a loyal, hand-picked board. It wouldn't be hard for her to fake attendance records or edit footage, and the HOA clubhouse was only a 5-minute drive from our house. Plenty of time to slip away and return unnoticed. Still, the police seemed eager to believe her. One officer even muttered under his breath, "You sure you're not just emotional, sir?" These kinds of cases usually involve a custody dispute or a runaway. I wanted to punch him. Our neighbors, those same ones who had smiled at us just a week earlier, now avoided our eyes. They closed their blinds when we passed. They shrugged when we knocked, claimed they didn't know anything. But I saw the guilt in their faces, the fear. Some knew something. They just didn't want to say it. Maybe they were scared of Martha. Maybe they owed her something. Or maybe they just didn't care enough to get involved. I drove to Martha's house that evening. Her pristine colonial sat glowing under porch lights, and her manicured lawn looked untouched by anything as messy as human suffering. She opened the door herself. Perfect hair, polished nails, that same smirk. "Joel," she greeted, her voice like silk over barbed wire. What a surprise. I didn't wait. "Where is Nora?" Her smile didn't falter. "Excuse me." "Don't play dumb. I saw the plate. HOA 1. That's your car." "Well, I'm flattered you remember my license plate," she said coolly, stepping forward slightly, her perfume sickly sweet. "But I think your grief is clouding your judgment. You should be with your wife, not throwing baseless accusations at your neighbors." "You're not my neighbor," I growled. "You're a parasite." Her face twitched for the briefest second, like a mask cracking. Then the smile returned, colder this time. "Careful, Joel. I understand you're upset, but slander has consequences." I turned and walked away before I did something I'd regret. But as I reached the sidewalk, I heard her voice float after me. "Some of us are trying to preserve this community. You just don't seem to understand how things work here." That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside made me jump. Tara stayed curled in Nora's bed, clutching her pillow like it could bring her back. I sat in the garage, staring at the van we used to take Nora to her appointments. I couldn't get the image of her out of my head. Her wide eyes, her gentle smile, her small hands, always reaching for mine. And now she was out there, alone, scared, in the hands of someone who saw her not as a child, not as a human being, but as a tool. The worst part wasn't even the silence, it was the feeling that everyone around us had already decided to move on. Like our daughter's disappearance was just another bump in the HOA newsletter. And Martha? She hadn't even broken stride, still attending events, still sending out passive-aggressive emails about lawn heights and garbage placement. But she had made a mistake. She thought we were weak, that grief would make us fold. What she didn't realize was that when you take a parent's child, you don't destroy them. You turn them into a weapon. And I was just getting started. The days that followed Nora's disappearance blurred into a haze of dead ends, cold stares, and helpless rage. The police closed the active investigation after a week, classifying it as a possible runaway with special circumstances. That phrase alone made my blood boil. Nora couldn't even walk across the house without assistance, let alone vanish on her own. But it didn't matter what we knew to be true. Martha Kingsley had an alibi. The community accepted it. The law accepted it. Everyone just wanted to move on. But I couldn't. Tara tried to stay strong, but I saw her unraveling. She spent hours combing through social media, forums, missing persons pages, hoping for a sighting, a clue, something. I spent my nights driving every back road within 50 miles of our neighborhood, convinced I'd see a glimpse of Nora's chair, her blanket, even a shoe. Anything. But every night ended the same, with empty roads and a silent phone. Then, strange things began to happen. My email accounts were locked. My car's license was flagged for unpaid fines, ones I never received. Our HOA fees mysteriously tripled, and when I protested, I received an official notice threatening a lien on our home. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just grief. This was war. Quiet, coordinated, and completely invisible to anyone who wasn't being targeted. Martha was tightening the screws, and she wanted me broken. I started digging. I pulled every public HOA record I could access, meeting notes, vendor contracts, budgets, and that's when I noticed something strange. Thousands of dollars being funneled monthly to companies that didn't seem to exist. Landscaping firms with no online footprint. Maintenance companies with no employees. All signed off by Martha and rubber-stamped by a silent board. Then I remembered something. 2 weeks before Nora disappeared, I had accidentally been CC'd on an internal email thread from the HOA board. It mentioned a vendor audit and a potential whistleblower issue. At the time, I thought it was just another HOA snafu. But now it all made sense. That email, that whistleblower, it was me. They thought I knew too much. And now Nora was gone. I started to connect dots that no one else seemed to care about. I found a contractor who'd been hired by the HOA for foundation inspection, but when I called him, he said he'd never even been to our development. His signature had been forged. Another former resident, now living in a different city, confided in me that he left after Martha began making his life hell when he filed a complaint about board misuse. She doesn't ruin you with a sword, he warned. She kills you with 1,000 needles. And I was bleeding from every single one. We installed new cameras. Tara began sleeping with the lights on. Every time we left the house, I felt eyes on us. The community we had once hoped would shelter our daughter now felt like a prison built by paper, money, and manipulation. Neighbors would cross the street to avoid us. One family, whose daughter used to play with Nora, suddenly moved out in the middle of the night. I didn't know if they were scared or paid off, but I wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. I drove to the community center one night around midnight. It was locked, of course, but I remembered that the grounds crew often left the side gate unlatched. I snuck in and shined a flashlight through the basement window. That's when I saw something strange, thick cables running from a main fuse box to a sealed door that wasn't on the community blueprint, a room that didn't officially exist, and a keypad entry that looked too new to be standard maintenance. I knew something was down there, and I knew Martha didn't want me to find it. The next morning, I requested access to the HOA clubhouse for document inspection, a right every member supposedly had. I submitted the formal request in writing. By that afternoon, I received an email denying it, citing ongoing construction and safety concerns. I forwarded it to the local police department and asked if they could intervene. I got no response. That same night, someone slashed the tires on both of our cars. I checked the porch cameras, now upgraded and backed up to the cloud. The feed showed a figure in a hoodie, moving fast, face obscured. But something caught my eye. On their wrist, a shiny bracelet. I froze the frame and zoomed in. It was a silver charm bracelet, the kind Martha wore every single day. Still, I had no hard proof. Just instincts, fragmented clues, and a rapidly disintegrating sense of safety. But I didn't need permission anymore. I didn't need the HOA's blessing or the police's cooperation or the community's approval. All I needed was one break, one crack in Martha's empire. And I was going to find it, even if it meant tearing the whole damn neighborhood down in the process. Because this wasn't just an HOA issue anymore. This was a hostage crisis. It happened by accident. Or maybe it was fate. I was trailing one of Martha's HOA board members, Linda Rowan, a middle-aged woman with a sharp voice and eyes that always seemed to scan for threats. When I saw her pull into the community clubhouse, during hours it was supposedly closed for renovations, I parked half a block down and watched her disappear behind the building, holding what looked like a stack of manila folders. Something told me not to wait. I grabbed my flashlight, kept my phone recording in my pocket, and made my way across the lawn once she went inside. The side gate, like I hoped, was unlocked. The clubhouse was dead silent. The air inside was thick, like it hadn't been circulated in weeks. Everything looked ordinary on the surface, folding chairs stacked in the corner, HOA event flyers on corkboards, a faint smell of cleaning products. But as I moved to the back hallway, I noticed something out of place. A narrow strip of tile that didn't match the rest of the floor, just in front of a door labeled Storage B. When I pushed it open, I expected brooms or paperwork. What I found instead made my stomach twist. It was a small elevator. New. Industrial. A keycard panel blinked red beside the controls. I stepped back, heart pounding. Who installs a high-security elevator in a community clubhouse? I slipped out before Linda came back and returned the next night, this time with bolt cutters, a crowbar, and a deep sense of dread. I bypassed the gate again, disabled the building's power to avoid security alerts, and pried open the elevator doors with everything I had. It took over an hour, but finally I forced it open and lowered myself into the shaft. Just one level down, a steel door waited. Unlike the one upstairs, this one had no keypad, just a manual lock. I picked it. What I saw on the other side would haunt me forever. The room was dim, artificially lit with low-powered LED strips. It looked like a converted bunker, concrete walls, no windows, soundproof insulation padded against every surface. There were 2 twin-sized beds, a tiny metal sink, a portable toilet in the corner, and a shelf stocked with children's books and non-perishable snacks. One bed was perfectly made. The other had a worn, flattened pillow and a soft blanket Nora used to carry everywhere, light purple with cartoon owls. Next to it was her favorite stuffed bear, torn, missing one ear. I froze. My hands started to tremble. I whispered her name. There was no answer. Then I saw it on the desk in the corner. Nora's heart monitor, disconnected. And next to it, a handwritten note in immaculate cursive, "She's safe for now. But silence is safer. For everyone." I dropped to my knees, breath shallow, heart threatening to explode. She had been here. My daughter had been here. Maybe days ago. Maybe just hours. And someone had moved her again. They were keeping her just out of reach, like bait on a string. I took photos of everything, every wall, every detail, the note, the monitor, the bed. Then I left before I could fall apart completely. I didn't sleep that night. Tara and I sat together on the couch in silence, both of us holding Nora's blanket like it could bring her home. The next morning, I filed a report with the police and submitted everything I'd found, but the response was colder than I expected. The detective reviewed my photos, asked a few vague questions, then closed the folder. "Interesting setup," he said, "but without proof your daughter was actually held there, we can't pursue trespassing charges against the HOA. The note? Could be a prank. Your word? Circumstantial." Circumstantial. That word echoed like a slap. I stared at him. She's 10, disabled. She's gone. I found her things in a soundproof room under the building run by the woman I know took her, and you're calling this a prank? He didn't even look up. "You've made a lot of noise in this town, Mr. Delaney. People are starting to think you're unstable, maybe even dangerous." That was the final crack. I walked out without another word, but they had shown their hand. Martha had influence, control, a grip on this community that ran deeper than policy and lawn care. She had law enforcement in her pocket, her board members acting like soldiers, and the town convinced that anyone who stood against her was a threat. But I wasn't scared anymore. I had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. I returned to the clubhouse one final time that week under the cover of darkness. Not to gather evidence, but to leave a message. I taped a copy of the photo I had taken of Nora's bed, her heart monitor, and the note right to the main door. Under it, I wrote in permanent marker, "You took the wrong family." The truth came together like shattered glass being slowly pieced back into a mirror. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't about Nora. Not exactly. She wasn't the ultimate target, she was leverage, a pawn in a much bigger scheme. One rooted in money, silence, and control. And it all started with an email I was never supposed to see. 2 months before Nora disappeared, I'd received a spreadsheet by mistake, an internal HOA document showing quarterly budgets. It listed maintenance contracts, landscaping costs, and security upgrades that didn't make sense. I remember pointing it out at an HOA meeting, half joking about how a single hedge trimming job cost more than a used car. Martha smiled, tight, fake, and said, "You wouldn't believe how expensive quality has become these days." Back then, I let it go. But now I knew what that smile meant. That spreadsheet was the key. I dug it back up from my email archives, then cross-checked the vendors. Nearly every one of them was fake. Shell companies, some registered to vacant lots, others traced back to P.O. boxes 2 towns over. I called every number listed. Most were disconnected. One went to a burner voicemail with a single message: "This inbox is full. Goodbye." It was a money laundering scheme. Martha had been funneling HOA funds, hundreds of thousands, into these ghost companies and likely pocketing the cash or washing it through partners. And I had accidentally stumbled on it. That made me a liability. But she couldn't just eliminate me. That would draw attention. So she did the next worst thing. She took my daughter and used her as silent blackmail. A warning: say another word and you'll never see her again. The thought made me sick. I confronted a former HOA treasurer who had abruptly moved out the year before. I tracked him down through a real estate listing. At first, he refused to talk. Then I showed him the photos I had from the secret room. His face paled. "She's doing it again," he whispered. "God help us all." He admitted he had discovered financial irregularities. When he questioned Martha, she responded with veiled threats, first about his job, then about his wife's green card status. "She finds your weaknesses," he said, "then she turns them into chains." I asked him what finally made him leave. "She showed up at my son's school," he said. "Didn't say a word. Just stood at the gate. Watching." That was enough. He packed up that night. I knew then with chilling clarity that Martha didn't just use intimidation, she thrived on it. She played the long game, created fear, then offered protection from it, made herself indispensable by manufacturing crisis. And for years, no one had stood up to her. Until me. I returned home that evening to find Tara staring out the window. She didn't look up when I walked in. Someone followed me to Nora's therapist's office. She said, quietly. I could feel it. I sat beside her, heart heavy. "We're too close." She's cornered. Tara finally turned to me, her eyes red but fierce. "Then we end this." I spent the next 72 hours building a dossier. I printed every document, every receipt, every photo, and backed them up to cloud storage in 4 different accounts. Then I compiled the fake vendors, forged contracts, and payment trails. I included photos of the secret room, the note, the bracelet, and Nora's belongings. Everything. I wasn't going to the police again. I was going higher. I reached out to a local investigative journalist I remembered from a viral piece about real estate corruption. Her name was Brooke Adair. She agreed to meet me in a public place. I brought the files. She read silently for 20 minutes. When she finished, she looked up, her face pale. "This is going to be war," she said. "Are you ready for that?" I nodded. "I'm already in it." She promised to run the story, but she needed time, verification, sources, legal clearance. Meanwhile, she gave me a number. "This detective used to work with me on background checks," she said. "He doesn't trust the local department either." His name was Lieutenant Drew Keller. I called him that night, told him everything. He believed me almost instantly. Turns out, he'd had his own run-in with Martha's empire years ago when his cousin, also in law enforcement, tried to find the HOA for zoning violations and suddenly lost his job. Drew had been tracking Martha's finances from afar, but never had a smoking gun. Until now, with Keller in my corner and Brooke preparing to go public, I knew the walls were finally closing in on Martha. But that also meant she was getting desperate. 3 nights later, we found a note taped to our front door. "Enough. You've been warned. Say goodbye." There were no fingerprints, no camera footage, but Tara and I both knew what it meant. Martha wasn't bluffing anymore. She was about to make her final move. There comes a moment in every war when you stop defending and start attacking. For me, that moment came when I read that note taped to our front door. Enough. You've been warned. Say goodbye. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. And it told me exactly what I needed to know. Martha Kingsley was unraveling. She was afraid. That gave me the edge I needed. Lieutenant Drew Keller and I put together a plan. He had quietly looped in a small federal task force that specialized in corruption cases involving homeowners associations and suburban white-collar crime. Yes, it was real, and yes, they'd heard of Martha before. But without direct evidence connecting her to Nora's disappearance, they couldn't move in. We had to get her to confess or at least reveal where Nora was being held. The good news? Keller believed she would crack. Under pressure, Martha couldn't resist showing her power. She would try to regain control the only way she knew how, by making me bend. So I baited her. I sent a carefully worded message through the HOA portal, public enough to raise eyebrows, but just vague enough to avoid direct accusations. I'm ready to cooperate. We need to talk. Just you and me. The message was read within 3 minutes. By nightfall, she called me from a blocked number. Her voice was calm, almost condescending. Joel, I'm pleased to see you've come to your senses. Shall we meet tomorrow? Neutral ground. I agreed. I suggested a local park. She refused. I think somewhere private is more appropriate. She gave me the address to an old wine cellar on the outskirts of town, technically abandoned, but still owned by a shell company tied to the HOA. Of course, we wired me up. Keller and his team planted audio and GPS trackers. I was given a signal phrase in case things went south. I forgot to bring the contract. It would trigger immediate intervention. But deep down, I hoped I would need it. Because I wanted Martha to speak freely, to feel untouchable. When I arrived at the wine cellar, 2 men stood at the entrance, tall, ex-military types, stone-faced. HOA security. They frisked me, missed the mic stitched into my collar, and let me in. The cellar reeked of mold and secrets. Candles flickered on a long wooden table in the center of the room. Like we were about to negotiate a medieval treaty, Martha emerged from the shadows wearing a cream-colored coat and her signature charm bracelet. Joel, she said, smiling like a queen addressing a traitorous knight, you've caused quite the disruption. Where's Nora? I asked, voice tight. She's safe, she replied smoothly. Or at least she was. You've been very loud. That worries me. Noise creates chaos. Chaos leads to consequences. I clenched my fists. You took my daughter. Over some embezzlement scheme? Her eyes narrowed. This isn't about money. It never was. This is about order, rules, structure. The community needed me. And you came in and thought you were above it all. Your daughter, she was never the problem. You were. The words burned. You kidnapped a child to silence a father. I borrowed a child to preserve the peace, she corrected. Had you kept quiet, she would have been returned, unharmed, and none of this would have been necessary. My blood ran cold. She had just admitted everything. I want her back, I said quietly. I'll sign whatever you want. Stay silent. Move out. Just bring her back. Martha studied me, then smiled. Fine. Let's finish this. You'll get your daughter. But only if you disappear. No lawsuits. No interviews. No more digging. You walk away. I nodded slowly. I forgot to bring the contract. Outside, chaos exploded. Within seconds, the front doors burst open as federal agents swarmed in. Martha's guards tried to run but were tackled to the ground. Keller entered next, gun drawn, voice thunderous. Martha Kingsley, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, fraud, obstruction of justice, and unlawful imprisonment. She spun toward me, fury in her eyes. You set me up. No, I said, stepping back. You set yourself up. You always did. That's when I heard it. A voice, small, shaky, from a nearby hallway. Daddy? I turned, heart leaping into my throat. Nora. She stood behind a barred gate, thin and pale, her purple owl blanket clutched in her arms. A federal agent rushed to unlock the door. I ran to her, tears flooding my eyes as I scooped her into my arms. She held me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. Tara arrived moments later. Keller had tipped her off. When she saw Nora, she dropped to her knees, sobbing, holding our daughter like she never wanted to let go again. Martha was dragged past us in cuffs, still shouting, "You're ruining everything." I kept her safe. This neighborhood needed order. But no one listened. Not anymore. She had lost, and Nora was finally free. The arrest made headlines across the state. HOA president arrested for kidnapping, fraud, and extortion in suburban scandal. News trucks lined our once quiet street. Reporters dug deep into Martha Kingsley's past and uncovered a decades-long trail of corruption, cover-ups, and coerced silence. HOA board members scrambled to distance themselves. Some resigned. Others were indicted. The secret bunker beneath the clubhouse was labeled a civil rights crime scene by federal investigators. Overnight, the narrative flipped from a concerned, grieving father allegedly lashing out to a hero who exposed one of the most cold-blooded suburban criminals in recent memory. But for me, none of that mattered as much as the sound of Nora's laughter echoing through our house again. She was safe, physically at least. Emotionally, it would take time. She didn't talk much about what happened during those lost weeks. All we knew was that she had been moved between hidden locations, mostly inside the development, always underground, always in silence. The people guarding her didn't speak. She was fed, kept clean, even given books and puzzles. But she wasn't loved. She wasn't held when she cried. And that emptiness had etched itself into her eyes. Tara and I focused on rebuilding. We took turns sleeping beside her at night. We enrolled her in therapy. We bought her new art supplies. Slowly, light returned to her spirit. She started painting again, at first dark swirling shapes, but then soft pastels. She drew owls again, then stars. And one day, she drew the three of us holding hands in front of a house with the words "Safe Now" written above the door. That was the first time Tara and I truly allowed ourselves to cry. Martha's trial was swift, brutal, and public. The prosecution laid out every dirty detail. The embezzlement, the fake companies, the bribes to local officials, the manipulation of residents, the threats against whistleblowers, and most damning of all, the secret detention of a disabled child used as leverage. The defense tried to paint her as a woman overwhelmed by responsibility, trying to preserve a fragile community from collapse. But her own words, captured during the sting, sealed her fate. "I borrowed a child to preserve the peace." The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply looked at me, stone-faced, and said, "You still don't understand what you've done." But I did. I'd broken the cycle. For Nora. For Tara. For every neighbor too afraid to speak. For every family Martha had bullied into submission. Her empire had crumbled, and out of its ruins, something better had a chance to grow. In the months that followed, our community transformed. The HOA was disbanded by court order and replaced with a voluntary neighborhood council. No more fines for lawn length. No more threats over accessibility ramps or therapy dogs. Instead, families came together. Neighbors who had once looked away now offered help. Meals, conversations, apologies. One evening, a woman who had once sat on Martha's board knocked on our door. She handed Nora a handmade bracelet and whispered, "For strength, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." Nora didn't say anything. She just nodded and slipped the bracelet on. It stayed on her wrist every day after that. I now speak at town hall meetings, local councils, even state legislative hearings. I advocate for HOA oversight and reform laws to prevent what happened to us from happening to anyone else. My story has become a symbol not of tragedy, but of what happens when one family refuses to stay silent. As for Nora, she's stronger than ever. She no longer asks if the doors are locked every night. She no longer flinches at the word neighbor. She wheels herself into art class twice a week, now sketching galaxies, mythical creatures, and heroes with capes and wheels. When someone asks who her hero is, she points to herself in her drawings. But every once in a while, she draws that cellar. Cold, gray, lonely, and then she adds a sunbeam through the ceiling and someone coming to get her. That's when I knew you were close, she told me once. I could feel you. Sometimes justice doesn't come with a badge or a gavel. Sometimes it's the steady grip of a father refusing to let go. And sometimes redemption comes not just in freedom, but in proving that even the most perfect facade can be torn down if you push hard enough. Never underestimate a parent's love. Never underestimate what we'll do for our children. Because when you steal our peace, we'll come for you. And we won't stop until justice is not just served, but burned into the foundation you tried to bury us under. If this story gripped you, don't forget to subscribe for more shocking real-life dramas and justice twists. Like, if you believe no parent should ever go through this, comment your thoughts. What would you do if this happened to your child? Share this with someone who needs to know how far a parent's love can go. And remember, every HOA has its secrets. Some are darker than you think.